If you are at all familiar with the Sega Saturn, you know it has an absolutely killer catalog of fighting games. Whether it was 2D or 3D, you had so many choices that it was easy to go that entire generation and miss some of its very best offerings. In truth, it was the fighting genre that drew me to the Saturn initially. I wanted to play those incredible Virtua Fighter games. Then I was hoping for a conversion of Street Fighter Alpha. And of course, who could resist the possibility of affordable Neo Geo ports? And the Saturn kept me busy that entire generation. There was always something to discover and always something that played completely different from what you had expected. But like all consoles, the Saturn certainly had its fair share of bad games, and there were plenty of those that fell into the fighting category. You don't have to search very long to run into some truly awful software that will make you appreciate the good games all that much more. Among those bottom dwellers was the 1996 release Criticom. Developed by Kronos Digital Entertainment and originally released on the PlayStation in November of 1995, it was not a well-received title. Most gaming publications at the time harpooned it for its poor gameplay. The Saturn port didn't show up until roughly 4 months later, and as you can imagine, it received even less enthusiasm. In the years since, it is often included among the worst fighting games for the platform, and in this episode, we are gonna put that very topic up for debate. Is Criticom the worst fighting game on the Saturn? Let's find out. The story of Criticom is your typical 90s nonsensical affair about a stolen relic that bestows great power on the user. Our group of fighters are after this power to wield as their own, and so the battle begins. Since this game was developed in a short amount of time, it's fairly light on modes. Basically, there is a single-player tournament, a two-player option, and not much more. There is a password system in effect so you can keep your progress. You actually need this because there is a leveling system in place where you move up each time you defeat all of your enemies. Yep, you heard that right. You need to play through this one multiple times to level up and actually see the real ending. Moving up a level changes the look of your character and adds additional moves. By default, you have 8 fighters, each with different styles. The fights are one single round with each combatant having 2 life bars. As was per usual for 3D fighters of the time, you can win by knocking out your opponent, getting a ring out, or letting the timer run down while you have the bigger life bar. Your shoulder buttons act as a dodge where you can change planes by rolling to the left or right of your opponent, allowing you to avoid attacks and projectiles. You can also double tap forward to quickly advance on your foe, or double tap back to execute a quick retreat. Blocking is accomplished by holding back on the directional pad as your attacker begins to strike you. There are also grappling moves when you're up close, as well as the ability to strike your enemy while they're on the ground. From there, special moves are performed similar to other games in the genre, like Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat. There's an assortment of both quarter circle directional based specials, as well as button combinations. Most of these combos are button combinations that activate a sort of automatic combo that animates on its own. Finally, for those of you that like to reconfigure your controller, this presents only 4 presets for you to choose from. Right off the bat, Criticom is a damn poor looking Saturn game, even for a port. These polygon fighters look jagged, lack refinement, and move in a very herky-jerky fashion. The backgrounds are also extremely plain and have virtually no defining features to speak of. Kronos handed off much of the Saturn version here to a company called Point of View, who would go on to do decent ports of Black Dawn and Mortal Kombat Trilogy. But working with a game that was already fairly ugly on its original console left little hope that this could be anything more. Saturn has some very rough games out there, and how does this one compare to the very worst offenders? It's right up there, I'm afraid. Even next to stinkers like Fist, the crappiness of Criticom stands firm as some of the most woeful visuals you'll see. Honestly, you need to crack into stuff like Death Crimson and Crypt Killer to thoroughly beat its level of absolute shittiness. No joke, man. You put this beside other so-so fighters like Toshinden, and it makes them look like bona fide masterpieces of game design. From a visual standpoint, there is nothing here to compliment. On the 3DO and Jaguar, this would have been an ugly game worth ridicule. On Saturn, with that fighting game library from the gods, this is an abomination that all involved should be ashamed of. Directly compared to the PlayStation original, you get a vastly different fighter select screen, missing transparencies, much more simplified backdrops that are missing the rudimentary polygon elements, rougher textured mapping that appears blockier, and a lower polygon count on the characters. As ugly and as simple as it was on the PlayStation, it's much more so here on the Saturn. Vic Tokai, a company usually associated with solid releases, published this mess, a sign at the time that they were slipping as a reputable publisher. Calling a game one of the worst anything is often hyperbole, but every word of Criticom being one of the worst looking Saturn games is absolutely true. But as bad as it is in this regard, it gets so much worse the deeper we look.
Commence battle. Player 2, triumph.
Sound in a fighting game can be a really important element. Some of my favorite titles in the genre also have some of my favorite gaming music. Listening to Criticom, you come away with a sense of disconnect, like the composer made this music without actually seeing any of the game. Nothing feels like it goes with the environment, and it sounds more like it was pulled from a meditation CD. Music can be quite subjective, however, so let's have a listen and see what you think. I gotta be honest here, before we begin my overall critique section, I actually rewrote this twice before settling on what you're about to hear. I had never dropped so much profanity in my entire YouTube run as I had in this one single review. Criticom is a woeful game top to bottom, and as I said earlier, it goes much further than the visuals. The gameplay is shockingly inept, even for an early three-dimensional fighter. The problems start with its poor hit detection, a jump that makes Virtua Fighter look realistic, and an anemic moveset that leaves you spamming precious few attacks that actually can connect. But things just keep getting worse. The addition of the dodge move often creates a problem where you're not lined up with your opponent and can't hit them until you dodge again to realign things. And in some cases, the alignment is so off, it takes stopping entirely so you can find the alignment again. This might not sound like much of an issue, but once you realize how aggressive the AI is, it very much affects any chance you have of consistent wins. That aggressive AI also highlights a huge problem with the core mechanics. There is virtually no downtime between attacks. You can just keep firing off attack after attack with hardly any animation pauses. Sounds like this would be in your favor, right? Wrong, because the overzealous AI is much more efficient with this shit gameplay than you are, so prepare to eat countless defeats until you find that one character that has that one move that seems to hit more often than not. And remember those auto combos I mentioned earlier? Well, they are useless anywhere near the edge of the ring. Start one of those within 20 feet of the edge and your ass is going into the bottomless pit of despair. I can't tell you how many times I wanted a combo in what appeared to be good placement, only to watch my fighter fall from the ring 5 seconds after I stopped pushing buttons. And speaking of ring outs, you can forget the first guy falling out and ending the match instantly. There is a multi-second delay that allows you time to fall out as well, leading to countless matches that end in a draw. Criticom is also animated poorly, lending everything a jerky feel that makes the combat come off haphazard, if not outright disjointed. I also had a major issue getting grapples to execute. Even when right up on an enemy, it would fail 9 times out of 10, despite being easy to pull off according to the instruction manual. Time and time again, my matches would descend into a frustrating series of timeouts, ring outs, and move spamming just to avoid a loss. Not even the leveling system can save it. While it was novel to power up your fighter across multiple play sessions, the AI and gameplay simply won't let you enjoy it. It's that broken. There's just no other way to describe this. No easy way to let you down. This nightmare is genuinely one of the very worst fighting games on the Saturn, if not one of the worst ever made. It's a shitting of the bed and a dumpster fire rolled up into one giant FU from the developer and publisher. It was bad on the PlayStation, and here, it's even worse. Oh yeah.
Player 1 triumph.
Some of you may be asking, if Criticom is so bad, why the hell did you review it? This was originally part of a PlayStation vs. Saturn episode I did a long time ago, and I was so shocked by how bad it was, I decided to pull it and do a full review. Funnily enough, after putting a few hours of capture together for this review, I came away realizing it was even worse than I had initially guessed. This is one of the few games you will ever hear me say it has no value whatsoever. I mean none. Zero. There is nothing here for anyone. Sound, graphics, gameplay, art style, characters, story, whatever part you want to ask about, my response will be the same. Skip it. It's terrible. The only way anyone could have enjoyed this is if they got it as a kid and had no choice but to play it. Not long after this piece of crap was published, Vic Tokai exited the gaming business entirely, with Kronos the developer shutting down shop only a few years later. Before they closed the doors, they created a sort of successor to Criticom called Dark Rift, which found its way to the Nintendo 64 and PC in 1997. You folks that love Saturn trivia will also find it interesting that the Japanese Saturn version of Criticom wasn't released until nearly a year after its North American debut, and was subtitled The Critical Combat. The Japanese gaming press had a field day with it, crushing it in reviews, with even the usually generous fan magazines having no choice but to rate it low. Here in the US, most gaming magazines didn't even bother looking at it, but the few that did, well, I think you can guess how things turned out. I'm Sega Lord X. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.